Greetings with lovers everywhere, and welcome back to E-Train Talks. I'm E-Train, and one of my main goals of my podcast is to promote diversity in middle grade books. And with June being Pride Month, I thought it'd be perfect to talk with one of my all-time favorite authors. I said that about a lot of people, but Michael Leali is seriously, his books are chef's kiss amazing. His profound and meaningful stories are full of quick wit, heart, and some history too. He finds ways to weave the most entertaining and also thought-provoking storylines into his already well-crafted, heartfelt stories. Just when you think he's done, well, Michael has so much about him that is perfect cause for some pretty interesting questions too. So stick around for that. Anyway, let's talk a bit about Michael. So Michael has done it all, from singing in choir to teaching high school, which is a feat in itself, and writing for middle graders, and in my opinion, we're pretty awesome. No bias there. He is amazing. And let's just start off with his books. We have The Civil War of Amos Abernathy, his debut. It was probably one of my favorite books of 2022, and that is not an exaggeration. And you will all love Amos's story. You gotta check it out. And we also have Mateo, which at the time of recording, it'll be out in 2 days on May 23rd, a Tuesday, like most middle grade books are released. And you have to find it in your local bookstores or wherever you find your books because it is a fun one. I was lucky enough to receive an ARC, and now let's get into the questions because I'm sure that's what you're all here for. So thank you for joining me today, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me here, E-Train.
Well, it is an honor because your books really, they kind of set a fire in me to search for more books like yours. And that's kind of really what got me super duper excited about the middle grade diversity scene, in a sense. And so I've had the honor and enjoyment of reading both of your middle grade novels. The Civil War of Amos Abernathy, it's a bit of a mouthful, but
It is a little bit.
and Mateo, that's a bit easier to say.
A little bit.
Yeah. What I love about your writing is how well you touch on, I guess, real feelings and challenges that many middle schoolers face, because we're a handful, and with that comes a lot of emotions bottled up inside. So you write about meaningful LGBTQ plus topics in a way that provides windows for some of us who don't necessarily haven't gone through some of the same experiences as your characters, but they're also mirrors for the kids who really need a story, an outlet like the Civil War of Amos Abernathy and Mateo. So anyway, to the question part of this question, when did you first realize you needed to share stories like Amos's and Mateo's through middle grade?
Such a good question. And so much of it goes back to what I wish I had as a young person. Books like these really didn't exist when I was 11, 12, 13. And for a really long time, I struggled with my sexual orientation. I didn't come out until I was in college. I was 20, 21 years old when I really started to grapple with what it meant for me to like guys. And that was a really painful experience. And I thought, as an adult, as a person who wanted to write books for young people, what could I give to today's young people that would help them in a way that something like this could have helped me? And so as I was figuring out the stories I wanted to tell, I wanted to think about what I could bring as me, Michael Leali, to this space. And I thought about my own experiences and my own thoughts and feelings about being a gay man and about what it's like to grow up with all of these different feelings that are not quite what sometimes straight people feel or think. And for me, I work with so many young people. I've worked as an educator for 7 years. I've also done a lot of work with theater, and I've worked with kids like pre-K all the way through college age. And I've seen and I've witnessed a lot of the joys, but also the struggles of what it means to be a part of the queer community. And so my heart is really in this to tell honest stories, but also stories of hope and joy.
a topic I've never discussed on my podcast or YouTube channel before is you're a historical reenactor, just like Amos Abernathy. That's pretty interesting. So, will you share what historical reenacting really is and some things that you did when you were a kid?
Absolutely. Yeah, historical reenactment is a little bit like being a living history book. And it's very theatrical. So what I did, there's a place nearby where I live where I would volunteer, and this would be from about March until October. And I did this from fourth until about seventh grade. And then we moved a little bit further away, and it was harder for my parents to get me there. But what I would do is I would dress up like I was a young boy from the 1800s. I would wear overalls, a flannel shirt. I wore a haversack, which is the bag that Amos wears on the cover. And in that, I would have my chalk and slate, my tin cup. I would keep a book with me, but I'd have to cover it in brown paper. And I would go from station to station around this site, and I would reenact, I would pretend to be of this era. And so I would go to places like a log cabin, and I would grind corn into cornmeal. I would go to the one-room schoolhouse with other volunteer children, and we would pretend to learn a spelling lesson, or we would do a geography lesson. We would play games out on the front porch of different buildings. We would walk on stilts. We would do one of my favorite things, which was to play Skittles, which is a little bit like bowling and combined with tops. It's like spinning tops. So it was lots of fun, and it was a way to socialize. It was also a way to really embrace and learn about the history that I really loved so much, especially at that point in my life.
Well, now I want to be a historical reenactor. I mean, I knew it existed, but I didn't know kids could do it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it requires a lot of like thinking and learning. You have to learn about everything because when people ask you questions, you have to be able to answer right on the spot, and you can't break character.
Hmm. Well, what was or maybe currently is your favorite historical period to learn about?
Ooh, such a good question. I, in high school, got really obsessed with European history, particularly Great Britain. I'm fascinated by King Henry VIII and then the Elizabethan era. I just think there's such intricately woven stories and the way that people interacted with each other. It just completely fascinates me.
So, something else we have in common is that we were both homeschooled. I wasn't really homeschooled for a long time, mainly some of kindergarten and fifth grade, but you were homeschooled for much of your elementary school years. So, do you think that being homeschooled helped you with kind of, I guess, your writing, or can it? And did you like being homeschooled?
Such a good question. For me, I really loved being homeschooled. I was homeschooled in a weird way, like most of kindergarten, part of first, all of second, third, part of fourth, part of fifth, and then seventh grade was the last year that I was homeschooled. My mom was my teacher. And for me, being homeschooled really allowed me to pursue my own interests and my own curiosities. And so whenever I was wondering about something, my mom just let me lean into it. And we would go to the library. We would often go to places like the aquarium or the zoo or a different like park, and we would investigate different things. And of course, from a very early age, one of the things I loved to do most was tell stories. So I spent a lot of time writing poems, writing stories, drawing pictures of the things that I was imagining. And my mom helped me take that first draft, even at a really young age, and rework it to make it the best possible version of what it could be.
Well, was your mom a writer, or I guess studied writing?
My mom would not consider herself to be a writer, but she's a really good writer, and I won't let anybody say otherwise. She is a poet at heart. She does all sorts of essay writing, and she doesn't write as much anymore, but she's was a big reader, is a big reader, and just loves stories. And for me as a young person, that passion was contagious. And I soaked it all up. She read to me and my siblings all the time, all the time growing up. And so I was surrounded by story, whether or not I was reading or it was being read to me.
Like
Okay.
the chat GPT and all that AI stuff is really popular and kind of taking over social media and all that stuff now, and it grows smarter and smarter every time we talk to it. So do you think that there's a world where writers might be replaced with AI?
Great question. And I don't think so. I
Okay,
think
that's good.
that, yeah, stories are a part of who we are as human beings.
Hmm.
And I don't believe that any robot, even as powerful as they may be becoming and as much as they might learn, I don't think that they can fully grasp what it means to experience human emotion and the depth of what we know and how we interact with one another. So I think while robots might be able to come up with interesting attempts at stories, I think storytelling will remain with us.
Now, another interesting fact about you is that before you were a writer, before your life as a middle grade author began, you were following a path of singing, and you were singing opera. But in college, you made the switch for to go to English, get your MFA at the University of Iowa. So, is there a story behind why you decided to major in English instead of pursuing singing?
So I loved singing from a very young age.
Mhm.
I was very involved in choir, in musical theater. I took voice lessons, and it consumed a lot of my time. I spent a lot of energy and a lot of after school afternoons and evenings practicing and rehearsing. And I did. I loved opera. I loved musical theater. And it got to my senior year of high school, and I was like already lined up to do auditions. And I made a last second change to pursue English instead. For me, I, I, it's really important for me to manage stress levels and think about anxiety and mental health. And for me, the idea of pursuing a career where I was constantly auditioning and there wasn't as much security in what the future would hold, that gave me a lot of anxiety.
Mhm.
So I know that being said, I chose a writing, which also has its
Yeah.
insecurities. But for me, what you can practice and you can build up your voice. But at the end of the day, whatever comes out, comes out. And with writing, I get to revise and revise and make it the very best version of itself before anyone else gets to see it. And that gives me a little bit more of the control that I think helps me feel better about the work that I do.
Well, speaking of writing, I don't know if it is like flashcards or something like that, but behind you on the wall, is that I I need might need my glasses like what extra zoom in, but like it is that kind of plotting for your next book possibly?
Yes, good
Ooh.
eyes. So when I do my first round of edits with my editor, I like to put it all up on my wall. I'm very visual. And so what you see back there are the white note cards are me summarizing each chapter, and I include like dates and times. And then I take all the feedback in the letter that my editor sends me and I categorize it based on characters or plot or pacing and different arcs setting. And that goes underneath each corresponding chapter. And then on the smaller post it notes, I brainstorm all the ways that I'm going to make changes so that my editor and I are in agreement about what the story should look like. And so I go back to my wall often as I'm revising to make sure that I'm on track, but also it gives me, some sort of motivation as well to see it all in one place.
You mentioned on social media, at least I saw, that you have a new book that's going to be coming soon. I mean, not Mateo, rather a third book, and it's about parentification. I think that's how you pronounce it. So, can you tell us a bit about that and what exactly parentification is?
Sure. So my third book is called The Truth About Triangles, and it
Mhm.
comes out next summer. And I believe it is pronounced parentification.
Okay.
And it is a word that I didn't learn until I was an adult. But what it means is when a child is asked to kind of grow up too quickly, and they take on the responsibilities or tasks or jobs of the person who is supposed to be the parent or guardian in their life. And so sometimes that can be really overwhelming when a child is asked to do more than they're ready for.
Mhm.
Okay. So this protagonist, his name is Luca Salvatore. His parents own and operate a failing pizzeria that he loves very, very much. It's been in their family for a very long time. And his parents are not doing so well. They are newly separated and their marriage isn't doing well. His twin siblings, who are younger, fight all the time. And his best friend, who's a girl, might not be getting along, slash, maybe also has a crush on the boy he also has a crush on. So it's a mess of all of these complicated things. And Luca takes it on himself, kind of because his parents have trained him to think this way, that it's his responsibility to fix everything. And so this book really does look at what is the responsibility of a young person? Should they have to take on big ideas and big things all on their own? And is there a way for young people to remember that they still get to be kids?
My next question for you is about the Civil War of Amos Abernathy. Athy. So Amos Abernathy comes out when he's in fourth grade, but he doesn't really experience his first big crush. He finds boys cute, but not like a singular boy cute, until he meets Ben at a Civil War reenactment site. And that's when he first begins to write to Albert D.J. Cashier. So, did you discover who you were in such a way as Amos? Although we've kind of already discussed that. So, I guess, when did you really discover that? Since you came out in college, when did you really discover that you were gay? When did you discover that? Like, were you a kid or were you like that age? Like,
Yeah,
in
that's a really
college?
great question. I knew much earlier in my life, well before I came out. Um, I probably knew when I was in elementary school, I had, certain feelings and questions and attractions, but I didn't have words for it. And
Mhm.
nobody in my life talked to me about anything about being gay or what the LGBTQ plus community was. And even, back 25, 30 years ago, we didn't have a lot of that language that we use today. And so I often felt like I was the first person or the only person to ever feel the way that I did because I grew up hearing, well, someday you're going to grow up and you're going to find a nice woman and you'll get married and you'll have kids and that'll be the end of the story. And for me, that never sat well with me. It never felt right for who I was, but I couldn't articulate it. And so for a really long time, I tried very hard to be the person that my parents, my church, my family, society said that I had to try and become. And it didn't work.
Well, I'm glad that it didn't, because we have two and then a third amazing book coming out because of it. And we have like the amazing you, Michael Leali, exists because of it.
Thank you. I'm really glad too. It was a long road, but I'm the happiest I've ever been. And I love every part of who I am. And I think that's really important
Mhm.
for young people to hear if they think or feel like they're the only ones, or is it ever going to get any better? Can I do this hard thing?
Mhm.
Yes, it really does. And it's good and wonderful to celebrate our queer identity and not just accept it.
Yeah. So, did you come out because you found that community at in college, or did you kind of discover that when did you kind of discover that there are people like you out there feeling the same feelings?
So it started in high school, and I had a few friends who were openly gay, but
Mhm.
I was in a very different place. I was not so supportive. I had internalized a lot of homophobia. And so I held a lot of shame and embarrassment, and it came out in less than kind ways. And I still feel bad about that. And then it really wasn't, though, until college that this sort of nebulous feeling of being attracted to guys became fixated on a single person, a real person. It wasn't just the idea of it. And then I was like, oh no, like this is real. Like I'm actually having feelings. What do I do with these feelings? And at that point, I realized I can't keep living the way that I am, because not only am I doing damage to myself, but I'm doing damage to other people. And if I continue down this path, it's not going to end well. So I took a step back, and I was finally honest with, and the first people I told were my parents. And the first thing they did was they told me they loved me. And it was a really wonderful moment. And from there, it was a long journey towards feeling 100% celebratory about who I am. But I think it, it happened the way it was supposed to. And I'm really happy to be here today and doing what I do.
You were able to explore both sides of a situation. So Amos, he had supportive parents and he felt confident enough to be out and proud in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And Ben, he kind of had fearful and unaccepting parents. Even if he really had those feelings, he couldn't express them because he would be in big trouble because of who he was.
Mm-hmm.
So this story was really relatable to kids my age for many different reasons. It was more than just the queer aspect of it, rather the emotions going through it, hiding your truth because of an unsupportive family, quite possibly,
Mm-hmm.
or just an unsupportive reality, a world. So anyway, how long did you have Amos's story in your head? Or was it are you basically Amos, so you kind of had that story your entire life?
It's a really good question. Um, I'm sure that the idea and the story was percolating for a really long time, but I didn't know what this story was until right before I wrote it. I drafted the whole thing from about October, November to January of 2019 into 2020. And I think I got the idea, maybe just like the very first seeds of the story, in September of 2019. And it's because I was thinking, I had been writing a lot of fantasy, and I'd been thinking a lot about, other worlds and things far outside of my lived experience. And then the more that I was thinking about stories I wanted to tell, I wanted to say something about things that were true about me. And the more I thought about it, I was like, what's unique about my lived experience? And I thought about historical reenactment, being queer. I thought about being homeschooled. And so from there, that story came to be. And the story really solidified when I realized that I had a question, which was, where is the history of LGBTQ plus people? And at 30 years old, I hardly knew anything that predated the 1960s. And so this set me down a rabbit hole of research, and that's how I found Albert DJ Cashier and did all of these other research tasks, and found so much more information that had been left out of any history class that I had ever taken. So for me, it was definitely like once I knew the idea of the story, it just like vomited out of me. Um, I like your question too, though. Like, am I Amos? And I would say that Amos reflects a lot of the person I have become.
Mhm.
But if there's a character that I am most like, at least at that point in my life when I was in middle school, it's Ben. I grew up in a really conservative Christian household. And if I had come out when I was in middle school, I don't think my parents would have been very accepting. It would have been a very similar struggle to what Ben goes through. And I am very happy to report that I have the most supportive and celebratory parents now. They both have done a lot of work, they've done a lot of thinking and listening, and they are both champions of the LGBTQ plus community. So in a way too, like I think that this story is all about the growth that is possible. And that if sometimes we start in a situation like Ben, there is hope and possibility that we can grow into a situation like Amos experiences with his mom.
And why do you think that your parents would be less accepting, well, if you came out in middle school than when you did in college?
That's a great question. My parents at that point, and like myself too, we believed a certain set of beliefs that uh, did not believe that the LGBTQ plus community were valued in the same way or had like the ability to hold space and deserved space and love in the same way. I was told from a very early age that being gay was a choice and that if I chose that life, nothing good was going to come for me. And what I've realized is that that's a lie and that I am who I am. I was born exactly the way that I'm supposed to be, and it's not bad. In fact, it's good and wonderful and with a purpose. And I think that there's a lot that I get to do and a lot of who I am that is only because I am gay. And I think instead of, and that getting to that point took a long time for me to fully understand, but I wouldn't have it any other way now. I absolutely love every part of being gay and a part of this incredible LGBTQ plus community.
And now into Mateo questions, which I'm sure everybody is really excited to learn about because Mateo, when this interview releases, it'll probably already be out and the world will be screaming into the Twitter space and Instagram and all social media platforms just how beautifully amazing, if that is something, if that makes sense, Mateo is. So I was lucky enough to receive an advanced reader's copy of Mateo, and from very early on, it struck me that it was kind of a love letter, a beautiful one at that, to the story of Pinocchio. How Mateo kind of struggles with the, is he a real boy? Does he want to be a real boy? And that is a bit of a spoiler, but not too much. You gotta read the book to find out. Anyway, was it your plan to have these nuances between Pinocchio and Matteo? It does sound kind of similar. Or did it kind of evolve into this as into that as your writing went on?
Such a good question. I had been thinking a lot about masculinity and boyhood and what it means to be a real boy. And a lot of my master's critical thesis was about toxic masculinity and about the representation of boys in books for young people. And I really wanted to write a book that tackled some of those questions. So when I was thinking about what it means to be a boy, the story of Pinocchio sort of shouted out to me. It's probably the most famous Italian folk tales, and it's I am very Italian, and so it felt like I had to do this. I was going to use this story. So from the very beginning, my goal was to use Pinocchio as a vehicle for what I wanted to explore. And it changed a lot. The book that is being published today is very, very far from the very first draft that I wrote of Matteo. It was far more fantastical. It was more closely aligned to the original plot of Pinocchio. And as I was working with my editor, we decided that wasn't like the best path forward, and that I was able to explore more questions and curiosities that I had about boyhood and family and first crushes if I did a little bit more of my own thing. And so what I looked at were the pieces of Pinocchio that I loved and the like the parts of the story that mattered to me, and I infused those into the story that I wanted to tell.
Mateo touches on a lot of relevant and important subjects like fitting in, accepting yourself, first crushes, which we've all had, and we've all had that same feeling inside of us. Anyway, that being different and speaking one's truth. So these are all really relatable themes, but I mean, it's also a lot. And how are you able to fit everything so elegantly and perfectly into a middle grade story that's about, well, not a 1,000 page book like War and Peace, rather just a 300, 200 page middle grade book. How are you able to do that and make it seem so, I'm looking for seamless. Okay.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a massive compliment. And it takes a lot of careful time and attention. I revise a lot, and I start very sparsely. So I'll write like the bare bones of the book. And from there, I will start expanding bits and pieces to flesh out exactly what I want readers to take away. And so I do think a lot about not just what I'm writing, but the message that's coming through with each character's action and why that character is thinking and feeling that way. And a lot of it does happen organically because of who these characters are and the world and the problems that I've situated around them. But as you can see, like on my wall, a lot of planning goes into this, and it does take many months to really think about each piece of that puzzle and make sure that I'm not adding anything that's going to take away from certain messages or ideas coming through, or taking out something that is essential to that story.
How do you balance writing your stories with your teaching life, and do any of your students read your books?
Really great questions. And it's a challenge to teach and write. And it's especially the past few years as we've gone through the pandemic. I've
Mhm.
had to be really, really careful with my time. And I have learned to say no so that I'm making sure that I have time for my writing and that I'm really focused when I am at my school and I'm getting my students' lessons prepared, I'm grading work, I'm giving feedback, I'm making all sorts of contact with students, parents, and guardians, and then really holding myself accountable and not spending too much time working on school outside of those school hours, and then giving myself the afternoons, evenings, and weekends to work on my books. And it's not always easy, and sometimes school will bleed into writing time, but I am pretty proud of myself. It's been a process learning how to balance the two, but for me it's really sticking to my boundaries and thinking about what I need and want. And as far as students reading my books, yes, some of my students have read my books. Some of my students from years past have come to events and reached out to me and read my books. It's a very special thing to be able to share my writing with them after I've read so much of their writing across many, many years.
As an educator and an author of diverse reads, I imagine that you have some feelings about what's happening in our country regarding censorship, taking books off library bookshelves, and just books being banned as a whole. So would you share some of your thoughts on the subject, as well as what do you think kids and adults can do to help stop book bans?
It's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. The book banning is appalling. It
Mhm.
is it,
Agreed.
it is taking away opportunities for people, especially young people, to be seen and heard and valued. And when we ban books, when we censor words or ideas, what we're doing, especially because we're being really frank, what the books that are being banned are about BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the LGBTQ plus community. And in many cases, our trans community is being hit the hardest. And what that does, when we pull these stories, when we say that they don't have value or don't deserve to be in classrooms or libraries, we're telling human beings that they don't deserve to take up space. And that is only a hateful message. And that cannot happen any longer. And so we need to continue fighting. We need to, as readers, show up for our writers and for young people who are of these communities. And that means buying books. That means showing up to school board meetings. That means signing petitions. That means actively reaching out and writing letters to state legislators and saying, here's what I need from you. Their job is to represent the people. And the people need to speak up, and many are. So we need to continue that fight. What I believe and what I think we are seeing is a very loud minority of people who have a lot of hate in their hearts. And a lot of that is fear of what they just don't know. And we need to continue being a louder majority of people who believe in what we are doing and continuing to support books and really the value of human life.
100%. And what you said stands so true about how you're telling people that they don't deserve to take up space, because the stories that are being banned, they're about real people, real experiences, real lives.
Yep.
And by banning them, by censoring them, whatever you do to them, basically just saying you don't matter. And what's even scarier is that in places like for instance Florida or Texas, a lot of these stories being banned, it's not just school boards, it's the government, it's the state legislature. And it's so frightening what's happening in these places. And you can't, like you said, we are sending messages and emails or letters to these administrators. But what's scary is that in some places, you can't really find an administrator that will really fight for you, because the people that are appointed are in that minority that want to get rid of lie not necessarily live lives, but really banning books is taking lives, taking stories, and stories are our lives.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
So I'm also curious, have your books been censored or banned, at least that you know of?
Not that I know of. I think, one of the things that I think happens, especially for newer writers, like I only have a couple books out,
Mhm.
is what's called soft censorship. And instead of the book ever getting into the hands of a student in a classroom, it was just never there to begin. Like it just never was.
Mhm.
So sometimes a lot of books by BIPOC authors, a lot of books by LGBTQ plus authors just never even make the list. They're never purchased in the first place. They're largely ignored. And so it's hard for me to know at this point if my books have been banned. I haven't heard of anything yet, or if they're simply just not being talked about, if they are being removed or eliminated before that conversation can even begin. And of course, my hope is that my books are never banned. I'm also realistic, and I know that that's likely not the case, but I hope for as long as possible that the stories that I tell will get to the readers who need them most. And I hope that they will continue to find homes and spaces in places like Florida and Texas as long as they possibly can. And I don't believe that being banned is necessarily a badge of honor. Whenever a book is banned, it is simply removed from people who need it having access to it, and that cannot be. And I will continue to write queer stories for as long as I possibly can.
If you could be or meet any literary character, fictional or real, it could be your favorite author, your favorite book character, or your favorite nonfiction character in a fiction story or a nonfiction character. Anyway, who would it be and why?
Ooh, this is, and I was thinking about this question. This is a tough question though, and I'm never good at these, but I'm gonna go with, can I go with an author? Is that
Yes,
okay?
you can. You can.
Okay. I'm gonna go with C.S. Lewis. And
Great one.
the Chronicles of Narnia were one of my all-time favorite series growing up. They're still one of my all-time favorite series. And in many ways, C.S. Lewis started books for kids and fantasy in the way that we have it today. And I admire so much of what he did with the world building and the characters he created, and that they are so centered around young people having agency and
Mhm.
doing something and fighting for something that they believe in. So I'd love to pick his brain and get to know him a little bit better and understand the worlds that he made and created.
So thank you so much for such a thoughtful discussion, Michael, and a fun one as well. It's been a huge pleasure having you on E Train Talks and learning about your writing journey and what's to come in that writing journey. Your books add so much light to the world of middle grade, and I cannot wait to continue to shine a spotlight, a very, very big one. Like, I think I'd want one as big as my room to spotlight your stories that are coming and are already out.
Thank
Wow,
you
that
so
actually
much.
worked good because coming out. And I
You
did
did
not
it.
plan
That
that.
was very well done.
I did not plan that. So thank you, brain. Yeah, you get a treat today. Doing more thinking.
Thank you,
Anyway,
E-Train. You are
yeah.
absolutely amazing. You are such a champion for writers, for my books, and for the books of so many others. I am just completely in awe of you and all you have accomplished as such a young person. Your future is just so bright, and I cannot wait to see what you do. Please keep reading, and I cannot wait to read your stories a little bit later.